A lot of guests on this LinkedIn Live are leadership thinkers. They're researchers with insights built on data or practitioners backed by experience. But most people have just one or two big ideas. Well, not our guest today. Jeffrey Pfeffer, professor of organizational behavior at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business. Jeff is the author of 15 books on topics ranging from productivity to leadership myths to the role of power in an organization. His latest book, Dying for a Paycheck, is about leaders' responsibility for their employees' physical and mental health. Small wonder that Jeff has won all kinds of recognition from organizations like the American Management Association, HR Magazine, which listed him among the most influential management thinkers, and Thinkers 50, which placed him in its Hall of Fame. He's been a leadership columnist for publications including Fortune and Business 2.0. His column at Business 2.0, it must be said, was also called The Human Factor. It tells you something about Jeff's approach to the all too human organizations where we spend our days. It also reminds you that great minds think alike. Welcome, Jeff.
It's a pleasure to see you again, Eric.
Pleasure's all mine. So tell me, where are you calling in from?
Beg your pardon? I'm calling in from Hillsborough, California.
Which is in the Valley?
It's halfway between Palo Alto and San Francisco.
Wow, well, good. Well, welcome. You have such a polyglot interest in management and leadership thinking and practices. How do you decide what to cover?
So I decide what to cover based upon two factors. The first factor is something that's important, and the second factor is that's not being currently covered. So for instance, the effect of the workplace on human health is obviously important, but nobody was really writing about that very much, though there was a large literature in the epidemiological or health space. Power, believe it or not, is something that's very important for people's careers. But when I began writing and teaching about power, power was, and it kind of still is, as Rosabeth Kanner once said, the organization's last dirty secret. And nice people don't talk about power. So I try to find things that are important and undercovered.
All right, good. Yeah, well, that is definitely true with power, which is, I would say that book is what put you on the map. It is something that people wanted to talk about, but we're kind of afraid to. So why don't we start by defining it? Is power inside a business organization the same as influence, or is there a difference?
Well, some people define influence as potential and power as influence in action. But the distinction, I think, is not worth, it's not a very big distinction. I think power can be defined simply as the ability to get your way against opposition. So in organizations, there will be disagreements about what to do, about what the strategy should be, about who should get promoted, about how to deploy resources, and power permits you to get your way, to get things done.
It is a loaded word, as we said earlier. Why don't we go into some of the misconceptions? It's loaded. It's also misunderstood. What are some of those kind of key misconceptions about who gets power?
Well, I think the biggest misconception about power and about actually organizational behavior in general is that the world is a just and fair place, and nice people triumph and bad people suffer, and hard and effective work gets rewarded and recognized, and bad work goes sanctioned. And I suspect every listener to this broadcast can think of examples that are opposite all of that. The world is not always a just and fair place. Good work does not always get rewarded, and bad work does not always get punished. So I think the biggest misconception is that, if you just keep your head down, do your job, do a good job, everything will be fine. That's, of course, not correct.
Oh, God, that's so depressing. Well, if you don't have power and you want it, what are the three things you should start doing to get it?
Well, I think I'm writing a new book called The 7 Rules of Power.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you 7 things. But you asked a question of 3, and I think the 3 most important are as follows. The first thing you need to do is you need to get out of your own way. And that has a number of components to it, which we can talk about. The second thing you need to do is you need to network. You need to build relationships with important people. And the third thing you need to do, which is not unrelated to networking, but is slightly distinct, is you need to build a strong personal brand. You need to stand for something, and you need to diffuse that brand very much as a product would diffuse the brand. So those are the first and three most important things you ought to do. Get out of your own way, build social relationships with people who are going to be important to you and to your career and to advancing your knowledge about the field in which you're working, and finally build a personal brand. And we can talk about all of those more if you want.
Yeah, let's dig deeper. How do people get in their own way?
Oh, people get in their own way in 1,000 ways. First of all, I think you're taught from your early days that getting along with others is important. So people overvalue likability. If you think about Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, likability would not be the first word that would come to your mind. You are hired into a job to get stuff done, and oftentimes we overvalue being liked by others. I once was on a dean search committee, and the preceding dean was somebody very well liked. And my comment was the school was dead in the water, but the good news about being dead in the water is that no one could complain about the direction we were going. And that as soon as you start going somewhere, somebody will say, Eric, this is the wrong thing to do. And so I think we get in our way by overvaluing likability. We get in our way by using adjectives about ourselves and ways of speech that give away our power. Things like, pardon me, Eric, I don't want to interrupt, or, what I'm about to tell you, I'm not sure is correct. These preemptory apologizing, the preemptory modesty. I worked once with a woman, an Asian American woman, who was the youngest and the least senior, and the only woman in a group of people in a tech company where she was up against the power play. And I said to her, look, the first thing you need to do is I said, you're not only the youngest, the only woman, and the person with the least seniority, you're also the smartest, the only person who's worked for a high prestige technology company, and the person who's run the product that's had the most impact, financial impact. So there are 6 adjectives. You pick which 3 you want to go into the situation with. And when you go into a situation with adjectives that disempower you in any way, you're going to have trouble projecting confidence, which is so key in acquiring power.
Okay. So, overemphasizing likability, sort of undercutting yourself with preemptory, derogatory adjectives. How about building a personal brand? That was number 3 on your list. What are the keys to that?
Well, I think the first thing everybody watching this should do is they should do an exercise that I give to my class, which is try to write a 3 or 4 sentence statement about who you are in a way that makes sense out of what your current job is. So we all have a set of skills and a life trajectory, and we all have a position that we occupy. What about our life experience, our life skills, our life trajectory makes us reasonably uniquely qualified to be in our current role? So I could do that with you in a nanosecond because of your long exposure to media, your interest in media, your skill in media, and your skill in a particular form of media. So you could probably pretty quickly write a 3 or 4 sentence statement about yourself that makes sense of your panoply of experiences in a way that says why you are uniquely qualified to be in your current position. And I think everybody ought to do that. The first thing, so I see, there was a woman in my class from Puerto Rico, who's in the GSP. Puerto Rico, as you know, is very economically challenged. She said Puerto Rico actually has, much to people's surprise, an excellent engineering school, excellent technical infrastructure. It really lacks investment. And so she was going to work for the private equity company Thoma Bravo, and was going to try to, who's, by the way, run by somebody of Puerto Rican descent. And her unique life experience is, I'm a person with a degree in engineering. I have an elite business school degree, and my job is to bring entrepreneurship based upon technology to Puerto Rico, which needs economic development. And there was an African-American physician who, until a colleague called on him, never had said anything about this. He said, I grew up in a very poor background. African-Americans in the United States, as we can see from the COVID thing, have very big problems of accessing high-quality medical care. My mission in life is to take my medical school training coupled with my Stanford MBA degree that I'm getting and build an organization that permits us to deliver high quality medical care to the African American community. So those would be examples of branding. And then, of course, once you build a brand, you have to disseminate the brand on things like LinkedIn and Twitter and by blogging and attending conferences so that people know. I mean, if you've got a great brand but nobody knows about it, it doesn't do you very much good.
Yes, right. Let's talk about one of the things
that makes sense.
I'm sorry, Jeff, say again?
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things you just mentioned that is an element of personal branding is networking. That was also one of the three things that you should do to acquire power. Well, tell us about that, and how do you do it in a time where we still are remote from a lot of our colleagues or people that we want to impress?
Well, I think there's several suggestions about networking. First of all, networking is, my friend John Levy has a new book out called You're Invited. He's a very interesting and wonderful person. He's honors me by coming to my class. I've been his influencers dinners. One of the principles of networking is to think about what you can offer to the person that you're trying to build a relationship with, what connections you can offer them, what insight you can offer them, what knowledge you can offer them, what kind of how do you bring value to them? I think that's one element. Keith Ferrazzi, who has also come to my class in the past, author of the famous book, Never Eat Alone, will tell you that the first thing you ought to do is you need to make a list. You need to make, who do I need to know? Given my career, whatever that career is, in academia or in media or in electronics or in software, whatever, who are the people that I really need to know? Make a list and then figure out, how am I going to meet them? How am I going to connect with them? And so you need to be, I think, strategic and thoughtful about how you spend your time. Many of us spend much of our time with the people who are close to us, who are friends or family or people who we work with. The problem with people who are close to us is that they are, of course, comfortable to interact with, but they are also the people who probably know the same things and the same people we do. So the research literature is pretty clear that the greatest value comes from weak ties, people that we are not that close to and who are different from us, because they provide us non-redundant information and contacts.
Personal branding and the promotion that goes with that, networking and the kind of glad handing, if you will, that goes with that. Those are things that extroverts excel at, not introverts. Can introverts have power?
Absolutely. So I wrote a case on a guy named Tristan Walker, who founded a company called Walker and Company Brands and has a big profile on him in Fast Company. Actually, I think it was one of the longest profiles in the history of Fast Company. His company was bought by Procter & Gamble. He's a fabulously fantastic person, graduate of Stanford. The title of the case is Tristan Walker, the Introverted Extrovert. Many of the people I interviewed about him for the case would say that he's basically not a natural extrovert. Jeff Jordan, who is at Andreessen Horowitz and the founder of Open Table, will tell you that he's not a particularly extroverted individual either, that this is not about being extroverted or introverted, that, it's part of your job. When you have a set of executives, a set of team members who need to be rallied, who need to be motivated, who need to be informed about what the organization is doing and why it's doing it, your job is to stand up in front of them, whether you're comfortable about it or not. It is just part of your job. And speaking, as you know, and writing, as you certainly know, these are skills. So you do not have to be a natural extrovert in order to do this. This is a skill that can be developed with practice. And in fact, John Levy in his book talks about how at the age of 28, he was not only was he not very successful, he was not a natural, in quotes, networker. He was not a natural glad hander. And his ability to build the influencer dinner series and all of this stuff came out of learning the relevant social science and applying it and being thoughtful and strategic about his behaviors. So this is not about personality. This is about behavior.
It's interesting what you're saying about sort of understanding what the moment calls for from you and doing what you need to do your job is perhaps a little at odds with some of the popular thinking about what are the characteristics of a good leader these days, where the attributes that are in play a lot are authenticity, modesty, vulnerability. Is that not correct? Are those not really useful skills for a leader? Attributes for a leader?
I think most of them are not necessarily useful at all, not only for a leader, but for anybody else. One of my favorite columns is Adam Grant's New York Times column from several years ago, which is titled, for people who want to look it up, "Unless You're Oprah, Be Yourself" is terrible advice. And he in that column talks about how people actually don't want to hear the truth. And the truth often is, I think he's got a line in there or quote somebody that says, if people were completely truthful, marriages would crumble, and etc. So I think you need to not be authentic to what you are. You need to be authentic, and you've said it, Eric, and I think it's exactly right. You need to be authentic to what the people around you need. So if you're a leader and you come in and your company has faced setbacks, as all companies do, and you come in and say, by the way, our company's faced a setback, I'm feeling discouraged, I have no clue about what to do, I'm sad, I'm depressed, everybody's going to leave, the customers are going to leave, the employees are going to leave, the investors are going to leave, and your company is going to be a failure. So if you talk to any entrepreneur, they will tell you that one of the great skills of an entrepreneur is the ability to act like you know what you're doing, even if you don't, which is a quote actually from Andy Grove. So no, I think authenticity gets in the way. Modesty, when you look at what makes people successful in the social science literature, confidence, and Cameron Anderson has written about confidence, among other people. Many people have written about the importance of projecting confidence. And many people have written, there's now an enormous research literature on the positive correlation between your level of narcissism, the opposite of modesty, and your accession to leadership positions. So I think a lot of conventional wisdom has basically no science behind it. And you should look at the social science and see what actually predicts accession to leadership roles, which are things like narcissism and confidence and being able to project self-confidence.
I'm not used to hearing that narcissism is a good thing.
A colleague and I are writing an article entitled "The Narcissist Advantage." There's an enormous body of research on narcissism and why and how it tends to be positively associated with accession to leadership positions, even in the military. And part of it is because narcissism is related to self-confidence, and it's related to extroversion, and it's related to a bunch of other qualities that I think people associate with leaders.
So what people want in leaders is maybe not the soft skills or soft attributes, but something different. What is it, would you say?
So it's interesting that you would phrase the question that way. In 2015, shortly after Donald Trump came down the famous escalator, I wrote a column for Fortune, because I was writing for Fortune at the time, that said the skills we think we want in leaders is the opposite of what we actually select for. And many people thought that was, when he did get elected in 2016, everybody thought I had been very prescient. I'm not very prescient. I don't do political prognostication. But I think what your question highlights is this wonderful paradox. We say we want a certain set of things, But if you actually look at the people on the most admired leaders list, or the people who we hire in our organizations at various levels of leadership, it is pretty much the opposite of what we claim we want. And so one of the things that I tell my students is that you have to look at what people select for and what they do. Don't look at what they say. Look at what they do. So people say, I want modesty, but they select people with enormous amounts of self-confidence and braggadocio. I want people who are nice. No, not necessarily. I want people who are likable. Not necessarily. Look at who is actually, on these lists of admired leaders and who is actually running these companies. And even if they say they're one thing, look at how they actually are.
That's fascinating. A lot of your book about the book called Leadership BS is about the leadership industry and the myths that industry, coaching, and sort of then leadership writing and speaking promulgate. Is that sort of the gist of it? That the sweetness characteristics are not the vulnerability, the authenticity are not what really counts in leadership, and it's not really effective in a leadership role?
I think that's correct. I think we have a confusion or misapprehension between what we like or what we would like to be true and what is true. And so you ought to look at, and you need to actually understand both things. I'd like to know what are the characteristics of leaders that we desire. Mm-hmm. It would be nice to know what are the characteristics of leaders we actually select for, because I believe that's the only way you're going to reduce this huge discrepancy between what we say we want and what we're actually getting. We need to understand why we actually select people who are the opposite of what we claim we want.
Why is it?
It's an interesting and profound question. I believe it is because we say we want softness and niceness and all this other stuff. But at the end of the day, I believe we were probably hardwired from our evolutionary background to be able to distinguish two things. You're going to survive on the savannah, wherever we came from, in the African jungles or whatever. You had to be able to pretty quickly figure out two things: friend or foe, which is one of the reasons why similarity is one of the most important bases of interpersonal attraction. And secondly, who's going to win? Mm-hmm. You got to align with the baboon or the Neanderthal or whatever the creature was, or the lion in the jungle, who is going to win in the battle if you are going to survive and your genetic material is going to survive. So we are attracted to power. We are attracted to success. So I say to people, it's actually the 7th rule of power in the 7 Rules of Power book. It's the most important rule of all. Once you have power, what you did to get there will be forgotten or forgiven or both. And there are 1,000 examples of that, ranging from business leaders to Donald Trump. I mean, to look at Lindsey Graham, who was a never Trumper until Trump became president, and now all of a sudden, he's a big Trump fan. And in the New York Times interview, why did you change your mind? I want to be relevant. I think people want to be relevant. They want to be associated with success. Not everybody, but most people. And so, I talked to somebody once, worked with Steve Jobs, and who told me that Steve was not the easiest person to work for. This is before he got ill and became nicer. And I said, why did you stay at Apple? He said, because I wanted to be associated with Apple and with its success and with the opportunity to do things that you could do only at a company like Apple. And the price I paid was the price I paid. It is no walk in the park to work for most of these people. I mean, the truth about Bill Gates is coming out now, but Paul Allen, the late Paul Allen, years ago said working for Bill Gates was like being in hell. I mean, so this is not, these are not people who are necessary. And the message is not that you need to be gratuitously a pain in the butt or violate the rule that my friend Bob Sutton promulgates, the no asshole rule. I mean, he's basically right, but it says that your priority should not be to be nice or to be liked. Your priority, you were hired into a leadership role. You, Eric Schoenberg, hired into a leadership role to get stuff done, to make stuff happen, not to be sweet and kind and whatever. And yes, you can be sweet and kind, but your fundamental responsibility is to get stuff done. And people who are focused on getting stuff done often are slightly less focused on making everybody around them feel happy or feel good. And I see your head nodding. You must.
Uh, I think I suffer from the niceness attraction. People want to be loved, and particularly when you're in a public spot, I think that is a trap for leaders across the board. That and wanting to be the hero who rides in with all the answers. I think those are two big leadership traps. Let's move on to your latest book, Dying for a Paycheck. What motivated you to write that book? It's a little bit of a departure from setting the record straight about the true characteristics of leadership, effectiveness, and power. But what drove you to it?
Well, like many things, I was irritated by what I saw. In this case, I was irritated by sitting on a Stanford committee on faculty and staff human resources, and sitting on the Human Capital Leadership Council for Hewitt when it still was not part of Aon, and watching CEOs and not CEOs, chief human resource officers obsess about healthcare costs. And it occurred to me one day that and of course talking about how people needed to smoke less and drink less and exercise more and eat more healthily and all this other stuff. And it occurred to me one day as a social scientist that they had overlooked probably one of the biggest causes of ill health, which is what they themselves were doing in their workplaces, to put stress on people. We know, it's not from me, there's a bunch of psychiatrists, there's a ton of research that demonstrates this, that if you stress people and if you depress people because of the work environment in which you put them, they are going to drink more, they're going to smoke more, they're going to exercise less. There's this great quote from the New York Times psychiatrist columnist that says, we call it comfort food for a reason. When you are stressed, you're going to eat more carbs and more sugars and all of those kinds of things. And so that if we wanted to, in the spirit of the quality movement, you want to get back to root causes. And the root cause of a lot of the ill health is, in fact, what goes on in our workplaces. I'll give you 3 facts. Fact number 1, this comes from the Centers for Disease Control, not from me. 90% of U.S. healthcare spend is spent on chronic disease. 90% is spent on chronic disease. Chronic disease comes in part from stress and depression. Not completely, but in large measure. Stress and depression comes, not completely, but in large measure from what goes on in the workplace. You want to fix U.S. healthcare spending, you need to fix the root cause, which is the stress and depression, which is coming from what goes on in the workplace. And I had no trouble finding tons of examples. You have no trouble today. I think somebody at Oracle, a senior executive in the Oracle Cloud division, recently committed suicide. We know about death from overwork. The World Health Organization just announced 750,000 excess deaths a year from overwork. The French executives who are on trial from Orange, the telecom company, from the executives and the problems and the suicides and Foxconn, and it goes on and on and on. The workplace deaths from people who got fired and then go and show up at the workplace with a gun, etc. So the workplace is a source of stress and depression. There is now a large body of evidence, including a study that I and Leanne Williams did, that shows that depression prospectively predicts diabetes, cancer, and heart disease through unhealthy behaviors and also through the neuroendocrinology of the process and how it affects your neuroendocrine system. So depression and stress, this is not just something in your head, oh, you're a little weak or this, that, or the other thing. There are mechanisms that lead to illness and death. And therefore, we need to take mental health very seriously, and we need to take things that create mental ill health Not all in the workplace, but some of them are in the workplace. And so it is incumbent upon employers to do something. If they want to cut their healthcare costs, they need to create healthy workplaces. They need to create a culture of health.
And what are the elements of that culture of health?
Number one, worry about work hours. Don't venerate and make a hero out of people who, say, I stayed up all night. And the best workplaces, of course, the leaders themselves take vacations and they take time off and they heal themselves. That's number one. Number two, appoint a chief health officer, not a chief medical officer, a chief health officer, somebody who is given the responsibility of monitoring the health of the workplace and ensuring that it is moving in the right direction. How would you improve customer service? You would measure it. How would you improve employee mental and physical health? First thing you got to do is measure it so you know whether or not you're tracking in the right direction. And there are simple and reliable measures to use. I think you want to give people more job autonomy, more control over their work, because research shows that people who have more control over their work are more motivated, but also healthier. Job control is a very important element of health. You want to reduce the stress that comes from economic insecurity, layoffs, changing schedules, changing demands all the time. Eric, you need to get this report in by 4. No, I need a different report by 10. All of this kind of pressure and stress that is in many instances completely unnecessary. So you want to give people economic security. You want to make their hours reasonable. You want to give them enough autonomy so they have some sense of control over their workplace. And you want to give them a set of health, including mental health benefits that permit them to be healthy.
I think that you're a believer from our previous conversations in mental health as a topic that needs to be taken more seriously, not just in the workplace, but across society.
That's correct. And because it's important in and of itself. As we know, the suicide rate has gone up, and suicide is now the leading cause of death for young people. But it needs to be taken seriously, not only because we ought to be concerned about people's mental well-being, but because it is a precursor and causal element for many serious physical diseases, including cancer, heart disease, and diabetes.
In the world that you paint for us of effective leaders who are not necessarily the most likable leaders, that there is a sort of perhaps a trade-off or a balance that needs to be struck, who are the leaders that you admire?
So I admire a number of leaders. I think when Kent Thiry was still CEO of DaVita, he did a very good job of building a very successful organization that took both employee well-being and patient outcomes very seriously. The late Herb Kelleher was, of course, well known for the wonderful culture that he built at Southwest Airlines. My friend Robert Chapman, who you may or may not have had on this program, who wrote the book Everybody Matters, and transformed himself from a typical accountant to really a very visionary leader of a wonderful privately owned manufacturing conglomerate who is serious about and understands that when people come to work for his company in the morning, they have entrusted their well-being, both physical and mental, to him and his colleagues, and that you can be either a good or bad steward of that, and he's chosen to be a very good steward of that. I think he's an exceptionally interesting and wonderful leader. My friend Amir Dan Rubin, who runs One Medical now and used to be CEO of Stanford Healthcare, is someone who's building an organization in order to be successful. One Medical runs primary care practices. Amir has tackled in a very aggressive way the problem of physician burnout, which is a huge problem, as everybody knows, and is doing some very innovative things to build a sustainable organization, which is not only patient/customer centric, but that is employee centric, so that you can really run that successfully over a long period of time. Patagonia has been famous for years for its work culture and for its balance of work and family. So there are a number of places that come quickly to mind, and many others as well.
I would say one thing that unites a number of those people, the ones I know, Chapman, Kelleher, is that they're pretty nice people. Does that?
They are nice people.
Okay. So one element of getting on Jeffrey Pfeffer's most admired list is to be effective, but also to be a good person.
Well, and certainly, if you look, I could take Amir Rubin. You know, when Amir Rubin was head of Stanford Healthcare, after about 3 years, about 70% of the people, and that's 3 levels down, were gone. He had replaced different people because they couldn't do the job. So is he a nice person? I think he's an exceptionally nice person. But he's not nice to the point of keeping people in roles who are not able to fulfill the role. So I don't know how you would parse that out. And similarly at One Medical, I mean, you know, is he a nice human being? I love him. I think he's a very nice human being, but he is also completely committed to deliver high quality healthcare and completely committed to build a workplace where people can, in fact, not burn out. So sometimes that requires outplacing or getting rid of people who aren't part of the program, who aren't with the mission and the values, who aren't willing to do the work required. And oftentimes it's hard work required, you know, to do this. So I think it is not being nice for the sake of not being nice. It is being focused on building an organization that is successful. And so, for instance, if you're going to build an organization where people are healthy and mentally healthy, you may have to do some things that some people won't strike as nice in order to take the measurement of mental health and its improvement, or the measurement of physical health and its improvement seriously.
Great. Well, let's leave it there, Jeff. The focus should be on the mission, and being
on results.
Nice to have, but what really matters is the focus. Jeffrey Pfeffer, thank you for being on The Human Factor. And for everyone who's been watching, thanks for watching. I'm Eric Sherman. Have a good day.